versus lesbians, a podcast for your ears.
Hello and welcome to Wizard vs. Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about The Battle of the Linguist Mages by Scotto Moore. Shall I do the plot?
Why don't you? Because, it's been 2 weeks since I've read this thing, and so much of it has already faded from my brain. Or I'm no longer, what little sense it made, it no longer does, so...
Yes, that's telling, I think. I just wrestled this thing to the ground yesterday, so it's still relatively fresh in my mind. So we follow Isabel, who is a video game protagonist in real life, and also a video game protagonist in a video game called Sparkle Dungeon, which is a MMO in this universe, and you will learn a lot about Sparkle Dungeon that you do not want or need to know as you go through this book. Anyway, a series of increasingly batshit revelations ensue. The one that you should know off the bat is that it turns out that there are these things called power morphemes, which allow you to cast spells in real life and to cloud men's minds and to make people suggestible, Isaac, to warp reality around you, because it turns out reality is all perception because we live in a simulation. And I will not reveal how that magic works, because it's one of the few pleasures of this book to be revealed exactly how dumb the underpinnings of all of this is as you go. But the point is that eventually she...
The point is that being really good at this video game makes Isabel also the chosen one level of good at learning to cast power morpheme spells. Indeed,
and she is being cultivated and manipulated by several California bigwigs, including the creator of the game, the governor of California, the leader of the Church of Scientology, and...
carefully renamed something else just to stop it from being sued.
Exactly, and a mad research scientist who is in love with one of the founders of a marketing firm who were the people who originally derived these power morphemes. I think that's pretty much all you need to know. She saves the universe.
Things get real weird. I would say real fast, but this is also a very long book. So things don't get weird fast, but they just get weirder and weirder and weirder for a very long time.
If I was to describe this book like in the most compressed way possible, it's like somebody updated Snow Crash for the mid-2010s, because everything in here is about 5 to 7 years out of date.
Yes. It's funny, because these days every book has to be sold with 2 comps, and this one, according to the marketing copy, this one's comps are Snow Crash, which is the obvious one, and Gideon the Ninth, which doesn't make any sense, except that it has a similar sort of snarky, I'm excessively on the internet kind of tone.
Yes, it is as if somebody who was not actually on the internet was trying to ape the narrative voice of Gideon the Ninth and did a horrendous job with it.
I would say that it does a pretty good job of capturing the voice of somebody who's spent way too much time online. It's just, it does not manage to capture it in the way that Tamsin Muir does.
Yeah, I will get into exactly what the distinction is further on, I feel. Mm-hmm. But yes, I agree with that. Are there wizards and are there lesbians? Yes, this is actually a straight up wizard versus lesbians book.
Right? No, this one's the wizards. The wizards are, there's a lot of wizards actually.
The lesbians are also wizards. It's, there's some noise made about fighting the wizard within in ways that we've seen in other books. Mm-hmm. I would say that actually is part of what this book, because this book never decides what it's trying to do because it has no attention span. Occasionally it's trying to do the same thing that Empress of Forever was doing with like the wizard lesbian battling the wizard inside herself, except she doesn't have an interior, so there's no point.
Right. So, why should you read this book?
I would argue, first of all, if you really bend it over backwards, this book can be read as like a vicious satire on game development and Silicon Valley culture.
Oh, I don't think you have to bend over backwards at all to do that. I think that that's there. I mean, this is written by a Seattle-based playwright. I think that that kind of disdain for Silicon Valley culture is entirely authentic in there, and I think that it's the strongest part of the book.
Yes, but
unfortunately,
you would want it to be funny is the problem, and it isn't.
Yeah. The other reason to read this book from my own personal thing is so I was a linguistics major, and I was really bad at being a linguistics major, but I was a linguistics major, and I've long been sad that spec fic does not have the kind of like high quality, ridiculous bullshit linguistics that the other sciences manage to contribute to science fiction. Like, you want terrible physics that's, based on somebody who read like some pop physics book.
Again, we already have Snow Crash.
No, but here's the thing, is that most of this stuff, the linguistics in linguist mages is more grounded in actual linguistics than Snow Crash. And most linguistics, most terrible bullshit linguistics in science fiction is just like Sapir Whorf all dressed up. And that stuff is so out of date that like only anthropologists still think it's valid. And even they...
Isn't that still pretty much the underpinning of the idea here, though?
No. This is like... this is why this is like high quality bullshit linguistics, is that at no point do any of these meanings shape the way that people think. This is solely, making sounds can mess with your perception because aliens have colonized your brain.
Yes.
See, that's very different from Sapir Whorf, which says that there's something inherent to language, which means that if you speak a language, that language constrains the ways that you can think. This isn't saying that.
Yes. I would argue that it is saying that, just it knows that that's wrong, and it mentions that that's wrong. And one of the things this book does over and over again is mention, because it's postmodern, and it says it's postmodern, it mentions all of the stupid things that it's doing, and it's like, oh, it's not like that we're doing, it's something else. But it is that.
Right. But see, here's the thing. Like, faster than light travel can't happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so when people acknowledge that and make up weird bullshit fake science to explain why faster than light travel isn't supposed to be able to happen, but we managed to approach space, folding space like origami, and that's why, despite that's why we've overturned previous. That's acknowledging the rough, vague scientific consensus.
Yes, I agree.
And this does that, and most bad linguistics in science fiction doesn't. This is the author's note, I was not surprised when I read the author's note, which reveals a lot of why this book is terrible, like the fact that it is originally based on two separate plays that the author just sort of smushed together.
The audiobook did not include the author's note.
They never do, and they really should. But also that, a lot of this was from having a conversation with a linguist at a party or something. This is not in any way a deep or accurate reflection of linguistics, but it is at least not taking Sapir Whorf as actually true as its foundational thing. And that is actually a genuine progress in terms of moving the position of linguistics in science fiction and fantasy out of its most terrible racist past.
That is fine, but I would accept, and you have taken the word racist right out of my mouth, I would suggest that the way it is it has come up with to make this work is just as racist.
I would not say just as racist. I would say
it's still
not
racist,
great.
not as racist, perhaps.
How many written languages did not use punctuation marks before the late 19th century?
Not that many. Just Thai, Khmer, Lao, Burmese, Arabic, Urdu, Persian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Sanskrit, Hebrew, Greek, Latin.
And that leads me to conclude that none of those people were sentient.
Right, but like, I do not think you understand the degree to which Sapir Whorf is terrible and accepted as true.
Okay, the book limps over a very low bar with its linguistics.
No,
I acknowledge this. All right. Why shouldn't you read this book? First of all, it creates conversations like this. Second of all, it...
Hey, I had more reasons why you should read the book.
Please go ahead.
Which is, it is so fascinatingly, weirdly bad that there's something surprisingly compelling about it. It does not hold up after after about 2 weeks. Most of the book is gone from my brain. This is not, but this is at least an interesting, horrible mess. Also, it made me like Light from Uncommon Stars more, just by comparison.
Excellent. It made me like Light from Uncommon Stars less because it reminded me of Light from Uncommon Stars in certain places.
Right. So it has brought us closer together on Light from Uncommon Stars.
Yes. Here, I have another reason why you should read it. If you find yourself vulnerable to that kind of party TED Talk or elevator speech, that Silicon Valley, super exciting info dump kind of stuff, if you find that works on you, reading this book might be kind of a vaccine.
Yes.
Because you'll sort of get a bunch of those laid out for you at once, but they're so badly created and overtly nonsensical that you will learn to recognize the pattern without actually taking any of it in. So it might be good for you.
This is actually why I think that that this book deserves some credit for being a vicious satire of Silicon Valley. It fails at being funny.
Yeah, that's the major issue. Why you shouldn't read it? It is absolute dog shit. This is, in terms of its construction, and I say this I am the guy who's give me the messes, and this is a mess. But the problem is it's not even a mess in a novel way. Even the structural problems are Neal Stephenson structural problems.
This is, speaking of low bars, less racist than Neal Stephenson.
That is true. It has managed to be less racist than Neal Stephenson. But in terms of the prose, in terms of the structure, in terms of the characterization, there is no characterization in this book whatsoever.
There's really not.
I think that, can we agree that this is the worst thing that we've read for this podcast?
Oh yeah, obviously.
Yeah, so that's why you shouldn't read it. But that might make you interested. I don't know. I mean,
the thing is that this book is bad in sufficiently, because you say it's bad, but not in novel ways. And I mean, I'd somewhat disagree, because I think the ways in which this book are bad, a lot of them are Neal Stephenson, the same flaws you have in Neal Stephenson, but it manages to, because it is trying to critique the same things that it is sort of gleefully indulging in.
See, I never got that sense, but then again, I didn't read the author's note.
I mean, the author's note's not particularly helpful, but it's just a lot of the Neal Stephenson stuff. Okay, so actually, this is, maybe we should just jump to the spoiler zone.
Perhaps. But we got to do content warnings.
All sorts of weird things happen to people's brains, often non-consensually, I guess.
Yeah, mind control, mass murder, very
lots
handled.
of mass murder.
There's whatever's going on between Lonzo and his pop star girlfriend is definitely non-consensual near the end, but the book just sort of skates over that.
Yep.
If you hear me saying the words DJ fail and that makes you go, ugh, you're not going to be able to read the book.
I have no idea what that means, but
if use of epic and fail in that kind of language causes you to cringe to your heart, you're not going to be able to make it all the way through the book.
Right? Yeah. I mean, this is very, very steeped in like the internet language of like 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
10 years ago would be where I would put it. Yeah.
I don't know. Wasn't like epic fail and sort of thing? Isn't that like 15 years ago at this point?
Yeah, it depends on where you want to, like, because there's the cultural reference are more recent than that, but not that much more recent than that.
It's the cultural reference are like 5 to 10 years old. A lot of the language is more like 15 years old.
Yeah, that's about where I'd put it. But yeah, let's just get into this thing. Let's go to the spoilers.
I'm not making EDM jingles for this podcast. I'm gonna spite it by using my hands. Spoiler zone.
Okay, so like I was saying,
yes.
This is a more interesting mess than Neil Stephenson stuff because one of the things we were talking about how cyberpunk's last episode, we were talking about how cyberpunk is rooted in noir. And then you get to like Neil Stephenson and the later William Gibson stuff, and it has completely abandoned its noir roots in favor of this sort of, I don't know, like techno fetishism sort of thing.
Correct.
And which eventually kind of becomes what we have today in Silicon Valley. As all those people decided that these books were a how-to manual. So the thing is that, you know, Neil Stephenson's stuff is uncritically in favor of all of that. And this book is not in favor of that. You know, this book really wants to, I feel like, again, the author's dead and all, but like the book itself, narrative, seems to really want to be a biting satire of everything from Silicon Valley culture to the like speculative fiction roots, the like post-noir cyberpunk roots of it. And except it also can't help just being really, really excited about packing as many cultural reference, you know, trying to like rival Ready Player One for cultural references.
Right, and that's sort of where the postmodernism comes in. It keeps, as I mentioned before, trying to have its cake and eat it too. You know, being like, and it also posits its moral stances as being essentially aesthetic choices.
Yes.
Particularly with Maddie, whose one character trait is that she likes to revolt against things.
Yes. Yeah, no, Maddie is ridiculous. Like, how do you go from being totally okay working your Department of Defense job to working with Silicon Valley marketing to completely unironically being super into living in like squatting with a bunch of anti-capitalists, and it's because
it's
everybody
cool. It's cool. Right. She even mentions like, I couldn't work for the man because it would be bad for my street cred. She actually says that near the end.
Right, and it's like, but Maddie, you worked for the Department of Defense,
right?
On like making it was like making people. It was, you know, like weaponizing pop music or something.
Right. Because the thing about this is that the reason that none of these characters have any character is that everybody in this book is as susceptible to new ideas as the plot posits that normal human beings are. Mm-hmm. Like the plot sort of hinges on the idea, and this is sort of like it's also kind of a post 2000 and whatever election thing. It's like, you know, Trump was elected because the Russians, you know, mind controlled us all through social media kind of a thing. I think that's sort of what part of the underlying satire here. And like, it's suggesting that these people think, Lonzo says this out loud. It's like, I control people's, I tell people what to feel in the same way that, Facebook tells people what to think or whatever. He says something like that. And duly, in order to make this work as a conceit, every character here is hollow and
it's just completely hollow.
Just executes the latest instructions that have been written on their brain. Nobody experience trauma is mentioned, like, oh, we should have had trauma here, but we don't for this reason. Like, there's a whole lot of, oh, in a better book we would do this here, but we're not. The book is very aware that it is bad.
Yes.
And maybe it's like, and that's incidentally, we've mentioned Snow Crash and we've mentioned Gideon, and like the thunderstorm is meant to be sort of that's sort of the biggest immediate reference to the river and to the horrible creatures. I think they're actually even called heralds in Gideon the same way that they are in this book, if I recall correctly.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. The other thing we have to talk about, unfortunately, is Homestuck.
It's time to reset the counter, but that's
but it really is. It's because the sort of we're fucking up, but we're pointing out how we're fucking up in an effort to suggest that all of these fuck ups are intentional. Thing is perhaps the worst thing that Homestuck has given to storytelling.
I mean, it did pre-exist before. It did exist before Homestuck. That's why lampshading was on TV tropes before Homestuck.
Of course. It's just...
but Homestuck has definitely, created a generation of writers who think that is cool and good and funny.
Yeah. I should also mention, I should have mentioned this in reasons why I am glad that I read this book, is that I was thinking, boy, maybe I should write a Wizards vs. Lesbians novel, but it should be a clever parody of all of the Wizards vs. Lesbians tropes. And how bad could it be? I asked myself, and this is how bad it could be.
Speaking of being inoculated, yeah.
Right, exactly. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. Thank you very much. Now I've lived that, and it made me physically ill.
Yes. Yes, I remember when you were first starting to listen to the audiobook, and you were like, I think I'm gonna have to veto this book because listening to the audiobook is making me physically ill. And I'm like, well, that's very appropriate. I'm glad that you stuck it out, if only so that I don't have to suffer alone. But
again, the book does what it's talking about doing, because the feeling, and this actually, I know this is intentional because they put "and now my head hurts" as the pull quote on the cover. The author's very aware that this book is meant to be weaponized in a certain respect. It made me feel bad while I was reading it. So kudos, motherfucker.
I ended up listening to the audiobook at 1.6 times speed. It felt like a brutal attack in my brain, but it made the experience much shorter.
Maybe it is just the divine protection of Shabbos or whatever, because I read it and I was like, this is fascinating. This is awful, but this is fascinating.
And, once again, you get in one big gulp and not literally into your ear like a power morphine.
Right, I read half of it before I went to bed, and I read the second half in the morning, and then I was like, well, I have to talk to somebody about this, so I guess it's going on the roster. Yeah. No, I mean, this is definitely... there's a couple reasons why because in general, I try not to put books on the roster that we're both just gonna, pile on, because that seems mean. And not like anybody listens to this podcast, but if they did, I wouldn't want to be mean about it. And because also most books, when they're bad, aren't bad in sufficiently interesting ways to make it worth spending an hour complaining about them.
Yeah,
but this one is interesting enough, but also I feel like the author, most of the criticisms we're bringing up are things that the book straight up acknowledges and folds into its narrative and construction. So I mean, presumably at this point, I hope that the author,
maybe the author is nodding along with us.
Probably the author's being smart and not actually listening. Who on earth would want to listen to an hour-long podcast about your writing? like about one's own writing. That
Lee
sounds
seems
like
to think that
torture.
people would want to do that. I don't understand, but anyway,
I think Lee just really thinks that not Rosemary Kirsten, Laurie Marks would really enjoy the Twink Wizard jingle.
Yes.
About
But, okay,
Magic,
so
which is legit. Anyway.
let us take for granted that this book knows exactly how bad it is and exactly how horrible all of the people in it are and exactly how bankrupt all of the ideas in it are, and that therefore when I point out things like, oh, that's not how that works, that's not how that works, that's really not how that works, that is in fact the opposite of how that works, and so on, that the book already knows all of that, and that's part of the point.
Yes. Yes.
But I feel like I should mention it anyway.
Yes. Yeah, no.
The Sparkle Dungeon is impossible. This book takes place in a universe where crunch isn't a thing, where like games spring fully formed from the heads of their auteur creators, which is the thing that the auteur creators themselves like to project into the world. But that is absolutely not how things work. You cannot turn around anything with the speed and the level of granular detail that these folks are doing without an enormous amount of human suffering, which is elided by this. I mean, but that's what the human battery is, I guess. That's the metaphor there.
Right, and to be fair, this book is, cheerfully hand-wavy about a wide variety of human suffering, including, Isabel, like, flat out stabbing a guy to death, and then with a sword, and then like this having absolutely no emotional impact on her whatsoever.
Oh yeah, but she doesn't have any emotions anyway, so that's not really a problem.
And I mean, also to be fair, the maybe you can do this when you have the ability to mind control people and also are being secretly funded by like the entire government of California.
Yeah, could very
because
well be.
open records laws also don't exist.
Yeah, but also there is no scenario on Earth where voice controls are going to be more efficient than using a keyboard.
Right. That was the one that really got to me.
that isn't a thing. I mean, like obviously the whole mutated vocal cords with overtones thing might make that possible, but she doesn't have those at the beginning of the book. The in-game economy for Sparkle Dungeon would be completely broken. Having like one-shot items like that, which you hold on to forever. This has actually happened in the real world multiple times. Completely fucks up the economy of your virtual world, and you have to take care of the economy of your virtual world. There was actually an aside when she's scooting across the desert where it's like, well, real estate's not at a premium out here. Real estate absolutely is at a premium in MMOs. And there are real estate bubbles and market crashes and currency crises that happen because of this, because capacity isn't actually infinite.
Right, because servers actually take a lot of electricity.
Right. This book behaves as, and again, this is part of the satire. This book behaves as if that the things that Silicon Valley people believe, that processing power and storage are essentially infinite for everybody in the world.
Yes, and also human labor. That human labor. Yeah. That the large variety, that the huge swaths of human suffering that that Silicon Valley is always pretending don't exist, and thus can be easily automated.
Yeah. So I guess my problem with maybe this is me, but it's like if I see a satire of thinking like this, I want it at some point to roll up against how the world actually works. I want that to be in the book at some point. I mean,
I don't know. I feel like part of this thing is that you read this and you go, wow, this world posits everything that, your average TED talker says the world should be. And everybody in here and everything in here is completely aesthetically and morally bankrupt.
That is true. And it's like, but that's sort of the deal, right? There are ways in which, again, this book is similar to Light from Uncommon Stars, where it's like we can elide a lot of things and skate past a lot of moral quandaries because the aesthetics are really good. And in this book, everything is intentionally ugly. Mm-hmm. Like which is not to say that all of the there are people who like music, like the music that Isabel likes, of course. Plenty of people like that, but they don't like it the way that she likes it.
Oh, there's ambient dub, and there's Baltimore club, and there's Afro-cosmic disco. There's aggro tech, and there's cyber grind, but heroes listen to hard bass. Oh, beware the micro-genres. They are the purview of nerds. There's a million kinds of metal and EDM. Just listen to the music you like.
It's like the whole book is sort of a metaphor on another level for rave culture and what happens to it.
So what do you mean by that?
So
nobody likes music the way that Isabel likes music. I mean, like, obviously, because Isabel doesn't relate to things emotionally like a human being, because she, like everybody else in this book, is fundamentally hollow. But so what is it that's
I guess that's actually
faker
not true.
about the way that she
I think
likes
there are people who consume music the way that Isabel consumes music.
How does Isabel consume music?
In the same way that she consumes Xanax or Adderall, which incidentally, seem.
So you
music,
mean like as an emotional?
Music is a drug. It's an upper or a downer. I mean, that's the deal. It's like
that's kind of how I listen to music as an emotional modulator. I mean, I don't listen to it as like a drug, but I use music as an emotional modulator. That's one of the things I use it for. Is
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, and I do too. I do.
Okay,
I queue up my list of marching songs on the, at the end of a day of work to get myself through it. I mean, I remember.
So at what point are we getting to where Isabel's relation to music is fundamentally different from yours? Is fundamentally inhuman in a way that isn't just Isabel's fundamentally inhuman?
Oh, okay. It's not that the way that she works with music is inhuman. I was positing this as a distinction between the way that this book looks in music and the way that Light from Uncommon Stars looks at music.
Okay.
The Light from Uncommon Stars looks for its get out of jail free card for the horror of reality in beauty, complexity, subtlety, and heritage, tradition, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas this book is trying to engineer a way to be high forever, specifically on speed, in a way where the crash never comes. The thunderstorm is like the end of the night when you're coming down off of whatever you took, and they're shutting the warehouse down, and you're out in the street at 3 a.m, and everything hits you at once. And like, this is, how can we make the party go on forever? God, which again isn't a cheat, because the book kept saying, boy, this is a Deus Ex Machina. Boy, that's a Deus Ex Machina. Boy, that's a Deus Ex Machina. Here we go. At the end, a literal Deus Ex Machina. How clever. How very clever of you, book.
There's a Deus Ex Machina in every single of the 6 sections, and they get more and more close to an actual god with each section until
it's an actual
the penultimate. God. Yeah, I like that. Until you get to section 6, which is just called God Mode. Part 6 of 6. Okay, so the difference then is that you're saying is that Light from Uncommon Stars is positing music as this sort of source of beauty and true soul. Much like how the donuts, real donuts are better than replicator donuts because replicator donuts don't have soul.
Yes.
And that versus the music in Battle of the Linguist Mages, where music is just a way to put off. So music in Uncommon Stars is a way of expressing your pain and thus dealing with it, and music in Linguist Mages is a way of putting off ever having to deal with your pain.
Correct. That is a much better way of saying what I was trying to say than I said. And Thank you for helping me to get to that point.
And yeah, no, I can definitely buy that, because definitely one of the things about this book, and I think part of the thing that makes this book interesting to me is that it does sort of that kind of, I'm going to immerse myself in the glittering world of the internet as a way of putting off dealing with my personal problems. I think that's very compelling for a lot of people of our subculture and our generation, and particularly for those of us with like ADD and anxiety issues, where, you can just, whatever, whether it's a specific video game, or it's, watching endless things on YouTube, or it's just like Tumblr's endless scroll, having that kind of nonstop low, mid-grade brain stimulation, and dopamine hits is a great way of putting off dealing with your feelings. And I think that that's, again, one of the ways that this book engages with the world are, even though all the characters are so fundamentally inhuman and hollow, it really does seem to have some insight into the society that it's poking at. It just doesn't seem to have anything useful to say about it. It's, purely diagnostic and not particularly coherent even there.
But it's like, it's a much higher tariff to try to try to posit a solution. Like, and even when a book posits a solution, like Light from Uncommon Stars posits a solution, I remember your reaction to that would be, oh, you're going to fight the universal plague by playing violin at it? Is that what you're going to do? And I was like, yes, that's what we're going to do.
That was not my reaction.
That was your reaction. I have it on tape.
Oh my God, Isaac, calm the fuck down.
My problem was more that fighting the universal plague, because I liked Katrina's whole story arc. My problem was that fighting the universal plague, whatever you're doing there, isn't actually a meaningful way of accounting for the things you've done wrong in your life.
Yes.
That you can't, and part of that is that you can't account for the actual human to human wrongs that you've done in your life by grand acts of social justice.
Which is actually one of the things this book gets right, in the same way that Empress of Forever got it right, almost exactly the same way that Empress of Forever got it right, in fact. In the, you want to be the Empress who does social justice stuff and shoots all of the ICE agents dead in the street, huh?
Right.
Well, here's what that looks like.
Honestly, that's possibly the best moment in the book, is when Maddie's like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, she's the brutal Empress of California and is, murdering people and kidnapping innocents to feed her human battery. But she did shoot all the ICE agents in cold blood.
Yeah, no, that's a nice little satire on a particular kind of internet leftism.
Yes. Which
I did appreciate. I think that before I incorrectly characterized your take on that, the point that I was trying to get to was that I think a lot of these books that bring out, and another thing that I liked, by the way, is in all of these cases, like, this book is absolutely, the author of this book absolutely understands the symbol language that books like this deal in. And I really enjoyed the way that when people were talking about what the thunderstorm was, they were like, okay, this guy thinks it's capitalism. This guy thinks it's death. This guy thinks it's hatred. This guy thinks it's, and it's like, yeah, whatever. No, that's right. That is actually the right way to be dismissive about it. It's the bad thing. But most of the books are not able to solve the problem at the end because humanity hasn't,
Right.
And particularly you can't solve the problem because I was going to say earlier that the distinction between sort of that low level dopamine, sort of getting by, being anesthetized because we're living in a world that does not really cater to being a happy human being deal. That's one thing. But then there's this thing, which is getting higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher until the drugs stop working. Which, you know, is certainly the endpoint for some terminally online people, but is distinct from the way that you and I interact with the internet, I think.
I think so, but I actually think, you know, part of what I took away from this book is a sort of, yes, my decision to start, you know, limiting my internet exposure was a good one, I feel like.
Well, yeah, and it's like, if you want to, and you could view this book as a sort of, well, all of the Wizards of Silicon Valley now don't let their kids get on Facebook and have decided that, in fact, everything that they made was evil. And this book is sort of like a, you know, it's kind of a satire of a mindset that's a little bit out of date now, as we've discussed. But
yeah,
we have a friend from Silicon Valley. He once started a medical equipment company, which pivoted almost immediately into making an app. 'Cause that's much easier than making anything that helps people in the real world. Anyway, I bring him up because these days he's an anti-social media campaigner. You gotta laugh so you don't cry.
But one of the reasons why I said like this book is not a disaster in a novel way to me was that it also reminded me of a book called Lucky Wander Boy.
oh yeah, I remember you reading that book back in college.
Yes, which was sort of like
you were initially very enamored with it, and then afterwards very not.
Yeah, but it's a very similar book in some ways. It's like some hapless schmuck, and because that was written in the 90s, it's a boy, not a lesbian. You know, gets involved in chasing this, you know, it's through like the California computer dev culture of the time, and then he goes to Japan, which is like going to the Elysian fields in the 90s, you know, tries to find essentially the way, because he's searching for a glitch in an arcade game which, you know, basically breaks the rules of reality, and he's hoping for a get out of jail free card from the thunderstorm, you know, which is death, limitation, and end to the high. And that book, and I, at that point in my life, was really looking for that sincerely, as an 18-year-old would, you know?
Yeah.
Like, this book felt so much like being trapped at a party with a really clever, really verbal, unbearably high on something teenager who wants to tell you all of the clever ideas that they've had.
This definitely felt like being trapped at a party with some people that I knew from college and some people that I knew from Seattle.
Thank you for being delicate about that. We put it this way. I've been places. I've seen things. I've been at a social gathering where a woman who called herself Snake snagged me because of my browser choice. And so on. But the point that I'm trying to make is that none of them are ever able to come up with a solution. At least this book, you know, is like, here you go. You want a happy ending so we can sell this thing?
Right.
You know, this doesn't solve anything, but here, it solves everything. Here you go.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, what this book reminded me of is the parody piece, Ready Player 2 Girl Stuff, which, you know, if you want kind of the experience of reading this book, you can just read that and it takes like 5 minutes. But
yes, I really can't recommend reading this. We're making it sound more fun than it is, I think, even while we're complaining about it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that if listening to this makes you tempted to read this because, you know, you like a glorious, fascinating mess, and you want to know if this is going to be the glorious, fascinating kind or the like utter slog, not worth it kind. Read the first chapter, because and then just sort of go, okay, now imagine that this book is going to eventually involve teleportation and aliens and jumping in and out of the world of a video game, and eventually becoming God, and then giving that up. And then, so, like, is reading, like, 600 pages or whatever of this, all in the same tone of voice, going to be a positive experience, or is it going to make you want to never look at words again?
None of the characters in this book ever sleep, and you'll feel like it by the time you're done.
Yep. Yeah, the characters do get by on... The characters get by on caffeine and magic spells. Yes.
So shall we go to the grumpy zone now?
Before I embark on this latest series of complaints, I want to make it clear that I'd rather read this book 10 times than reread The Master of Jinn, because this one is absolutely a horrible mess, but at least it isn't boring.
I mean, I feel like we skipped straight there.
Oh, no, I have not yet begun to complain.
All right.
I kid. But
yes. No, but I know you said you had like 2 episodes worth of notes. I assume most of those were complaints, if you want to start sharing some more of them.
Yeah, I don't know if you're as much in a position to feel the way in which this book felt like it was written like a certain kind of AAA video game is written, as I am, having had to sit through I was happy to sit through, because it was a fascinating mess to me at the time, in the same way that this has been for you. A playthrough of BioShock 3, which is a game.
I have not seen any playthroughs of AAA games, and the only major game I've played is Portal, and Portal 2.
Yeah. But in terms of games where there's this way that game storytelling is, which is partially just derived from how video games are, where they're trying to make art, but they're also trying to give you options within a morality system which can be judged with points. Mm-hmm. And so you, as the character, ping pong between good and evil and good, in much the same way that Isabel does. Isabel's one defining characteristic is that she beats the game. That's her one personality trait, and it basically is a question of who's giving her the mission at any given time, because she never actually stops to think about the implications of the mission until she's already done it.
Right.
And this is a trick that video games have pulled over and over again over many and many a year. But these days, there are a lot of people who are trying to make games seem deeper than that, and not just sort of in a let's problematize the idea of this kind of morality system in the first place kind of a way. And you end up with something like BioShock 3, which is like, okay, what do we need to make this deep? We'll throw some sexual assault in there. We'll throw racism. We'll throw revolution in there. But we're going to use these as plot beats, and you're still going to get an opportunity to switch sides. And it turns out that everybody is as hollow and horrible as everybody else, because that's the only way we can write. It's the only way we can conceive of humanity. So let's make that writ large and just have a lot of like horrible, violent, shiny death as you make your way through these sort of incredibly sanded down, cartoonified versions of big real world ideas that are simply used as objective checkpoints, essentially, to get you from one action set piece to another action set piece. Incidentally, I don't know how bad this book is at its action set pieces as part of the satire or not, but
the action is so.
I would really have. It was a relief when we got there, because at least it had stopped info dumping for a second. but I wish they'd been better. I guess that's another thing that it has in common with Gideon. But it's like this. The thing about this book that was so difficult for me personally was that it was doing the most unflattering look at stuff that I personally hate just about the most out of, all available shitty stuff. This is the stuff that I like the least. And it was like shovelfuls upon shovelfuls of this. And I would have you got to see the head of the Church of Scientology get impaled, as you mentioned, which that's satisfying to a certain extent.
It was satisfying, though. I gotta say, it was really, really funny to me that this book throws brand names, like actual major corporation names, out left and right. Spotify and Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. But it has to make up a fake name for the Church of Scientology.
Well, of course it does, because the Church of Scientology is famously litigious. And
I know,
and it is actually part of the public brand of Facebook and Google and so forth to be evil. So they don't even have they wouldn't even have a leg to stand on as far as that goes.
I suppose that is true. It's just real funny that that the publisher went, okay, well you're allowed to. You can name drop all these brands. We won't make you make up fake versions, because it's like it's supposed to be our world, except that the Church of Scientology is named something even dumber.
Also, incidentally, the way that the book essentially makes an advertising company, the Church of Scientology, the state government of California, and a video game company, the exact same kind of structure with the exact same kind of hierarchy and the exact same kind of goals, is maybe truer than I would like it to be, but is not exactly true. It's not exactly true, please.
Not exactly true, but but I think that there is some.
Yeah, the point is taken, certainly. But why I mentioned it was that the person who I'd have really liked to have died in a hilarious way is the creator of this video game, who never gets the proper comeuppance for what an empty piece of garbage he is, and the blithe way in which he runs this impossible company and doesn't care about anybody he's collaborating with, and is filling all of his
he's fascinating, and he's sort of fascinating, and to the extent that any of these characters are interesting, because everybody sort of agrees that he's a good guy, mostly because he's willing to cheerfully go along with all of this stuff. But when it starts to require getting his hands actively dirty, he goes, that sounds like too much drama for me. And then sort of hangs out on the sidelines without...
Right.
No.
But sort of, his approach to the world is pretty much the same as Isabel's, except that Isabel is the the point person, the protag, and he's not, and he's the wizard.
Well, he's one of the many wizards. But
he has... Go ahead.
Because from what I vaguely recall of this book, the power morphemes get discovered, and then they kind of then they get this guy to design the game around them to train power morpheme users. And so, he's his entire deal is that he's the guy who isn't, Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, mustache twirling evil. That he thinks that by acting, by not being quite as much of an asshole and act, and staying out of the really obviously bad behavior by sort of acting high-minded, and seeming you don't want to get messed up, you don't want to get mixed up with those people, they're into bad stuff, he says, at the party thrown to celebrate the game that's designed specifically to find and recruit people into the bad stuff. And and everybody takes him at his word throughout the entire book.
Yeah, that may have been the single most infuriating part for me. That specifically right there. Yeah.
See, I had to assume one has to hope, at least, that this is deliberate, because he is, after all, a member of the Cabal, as they call themselves, when, they take over California and make it a fascist dictatorship. So I feel like his being willing to do the bad things but not wanting to be the bad guy versus all the people who are quite cheerfully willing to be the bad guy is, has got to be a satire, but...
Yeah, and like that, I mean, the book is too depressing to even consider as a piece of work if you don't give it that amount of credit, but again, like, I wish it had been funnier. Like, I wish, I mean, it's clear that the whole, like, alien punctuation marks, still really racist, I'm sorry, thing is, that's only there for the jokes, but there aren't any jokes. Like, I assume that in the text, the motherfucking interrobang, everything it says has an interrobang at the end, and that's the funny part. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, God damn it, you had this idea, you should have killed that darling immediately. Yes! Please. Like, you clearly had this idea and thought it was hilarious, but it doesn't go anywhere.
No, and like, the interrobang is the thing that I find most infuriating, because, like, the interrobang is just this stupid red herring that at no point, it doesn't go anywhere, and it's not funny, and it's not particularly interesting. And it makes you think that something more interesting is going to happen, and it never does. And that is really, and that is one of the things that, I really can't forgive in a book, is when it leads you to think something interesting is going to happen, and then the author just doesn't bother.
So one of the things that the book didn't disappoint me on that front, because I thought I was taking it as being exactly as stupid on its face as it was possibly pretending to be.
It did help that you were forewarned.
There's no way there's no way that this is going to go anywhere interesting. And in fact, it didn't go anywhere at all, because we were already on to the next Whale Award winning twist in the plot.
Yes. This book has 6 parts, and each of them contains at least one Whale Award worthy twist.
Whew. Yes, indeed. Oh, and we got a 9/11 metaphor in there.
Oh yeah, I completely forgot about that.
So, and also, like, maybe this is part of the satire, maybe it isn't, but it's like the whole idea that you can warp reality in the same way that you can warp, like, online opinion polls with your, Russian bots is predicated on the idea that, on the sort of, it is actually a Silicon Valley kind of dead-ender Marxism kind of an idea that the body will wither away, that the flesh is irrelevant, which is absolutely carried through in this book, because, like, their bodies get ripped apart and sort of mixed with other people and poorly edited and all of this stuff, and it doesn't have any effect on their personalities because they don't have any personalities.
Right.
They're just a series of...
And then they're reconstituted as, like, their video game selves, so then they can start using video game items and health potions, and then they really don't need to sleep.
And, it really, the point where this really came to a head for me was the bit where our main character, who has already transmuted her skin into steel, she's announced that she will never change it back, because of course she won't.
I think she transmuted into something sparklier, like diamond or something.
It's called glitter steel.
Glitter steel, right.
Yes,
so it's not just regular steel. It's got to be sparklier.
It's still metal.
Yes.
It's hard. We can turn away, lasers and bullets kind of metal,
Yeah.
And she is like, okay, I've transmuted my skin into this. I'm never going to transmute it back, because her whole deal is that she is a shell of ironic deflections around nothing. Mm-hmm. And so, sure, that kind of person would always have an impenetrable barrier around them. But then she goes to kiss her girlfriend.
Right.
And it's nice. Her girlfriend is kissing this metal mouth with presumably a metal tongue, and it's nice. And I'm like, this is the part that you didn't think about. This is the part that doesn't work. I just want to, if there are people out there who, and I know there are people out there who think like this, I just go out and take a fucking walk, Get back in your body for a second and see what's going on.
Please. You're falling back into that Tumblr thing of telling people to go outside and touch grass.
They're not wrong!
Oh my god, Isaac, calm the fuck down.
Or, do what Light from Uncommon Stars suggests and go eat a donut in the park.
Yes! Please! Just take off your headphones for a second. You don't have to do it all the time. I know that it's good for.
Imagine college-aged Isaac hearing you say that.
The reason this book upsets me so much is that college-aged Isaac would have uncritically loved this.
Right.
You see what I mean? This is why I can't necessarily, interpret it as a satire, because it's like there is a person for whom all of the shiny, whiz-bang, cocaine of this, they'll just take it in and go, yeah, and like I cannot overemphasize how that doesn't work out well in the end. Because you do eventually have to turn off the music and turn off the lights, and then you're lying in bed and you can't sleep and you haven't slept for days. And it doesn't look like it does in this book. So next time on Wizards vs. Lesbians.
So are we done? Because that's actually, I feel like, a pretty good stopping place.
I've said my piece.
I feel like we've done a pretty good job with engaging with this text to as much of a depth as anyone should bother.
Reasonably should, yes.
What are we doing next time on Wizards vs. Lesbians?
I was actually going to ask you. I don't
Among
remember either.
Thieves, which is by M.J. Kuhn, it's a reader request.
Oh, excellent. I always like doing reader requests.
Yeah, I gotta say I was not super impressed with this one, but
Ooh, sorry, reader.
Sorry, reader.
Maybe I'll be super impressed with it. Who knows?
I hope you enjoyed the podcast anyway.
Indeed.
But I also feel like if somebody is suggesting a book for this podcast, that they kind of know what they're getting into. But that said, please suggest stuff for us. If it contains wizards and lesbians or something that can reasonably be interpreted to that extent, we will probably cover it eventually in the podcast. So,
yes, indeed. And Alexis is doing their part by chewing through piles of really mediocre Wizards versus Lesbians books that aren't even worth talking about on this podcast. So this book actually, this book is, as we've said, the worst thing that we've done for this podcast, but it was at least interesting enough to talk about for an hour. And that's
right, as opposed to the 3 books I read over Shabbos this week, none of which were even interesting enough to put on the maybes list.
Whew, man, maybe we need to take a break from this just to let our minds reset back to a normal level of expectation for prose. Anyway.
Thank you guys, as always.
Bye-bye.
Bye.